I don't think there's too much to go on. It depends on, yeah.
Good evening. I'd like to call the village board meeting for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, November 19th, 2019 to order with roll call, please.
Cavelli?
Here.
Betts?
Here.
Weinhammer?
Here.
Collier?
Here.
Kraus?
Here.
McAlpine?
Here.
Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Brings us
Hey, Brian, will you run back and see if anybody signed in, please? We'll now move to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. We're checking the list.
Eric, can you check the microphone and make sure it's on?
Thank you. Stan? Did you have something you wanted to address the village board on?
How was the first time we moved, like 5 years ago, to the Cary from Grand?
What, hold on one second. Could you please come up to the microphone? If you could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Stan Kolodzi, Kolodziej. We live on a 539 Carywood Circle, Cary, Illinois. Phone number is 847.
You don't have to give your number.
Okay,
This is a matter of public record.
Okay.
It's being recorded
Okay.
right now.
okay. Reason we don't show up here because we moved here like 5 years ago and we have a couple issue to the complex. And I mentioned at our meeting, we don't have any speed limit sign on, in our residential area. It's a lot of kids and people that make a shortcuts. You know, sometimes they drive like a 70, 80 miles per hour. They don't even stop on the stop sign. I almost complained 4 times already to the lady, so she's on the front desk. Probably she know me or, and she got tired from my complaint. So this is one reason, speed limit sign on Carywood Circle. I know, so it's a residential area, which we should drive like at 25 miles per hour, but if the people don't see, they don't care. But at 7 o'clock in the morning, the kids go to the school, and those people, they don't pay attention. And I have another issue. A lot of people use our street for like a junkyard or something, especially during the summer. We could put some like a no parking sign or no parking during the night or something, so we could move those cars from the street because sometimes the cars will sit for 6 months, nobody drive. There was a whole month the car was moving the missing plates. I called the police last winter. During the winter, there was parked van right across from my house. And after my phone, the car was moved 2 weeks later. So it's for me, it's not fair. And across from I got the drawing from our community. We got a little district park, the lot of kids, and that's what we ask our board. We're gonna ask our village or we don't know the precision because we are right now and changing our management company. So we're gonna request the village or somebody, I have no idea who, because I don't have that much experience. For a couple, no parking sign across that park district. I got the drawing because a lot of people, so they live in this neighborhood, they park car after park, school bus, squad cars, everything. And when I try to make a right turn from Cary Drive to Carywood Circle, there's no way because it's blocked and nobody see nothing. and we have to drive over 100 or 150 feet. You see something after the curve because it's always blocked, you know? It's danger for the kids and danger for us. What's happened if I don't see nobody, I'm gonna in the middle of the street and somebody come from the other side, I could show you that, maybe,
I'm familiar with the subdivision.
you know?
That's down by our Public Works
Yeah.
Department.
So we're gonna ask for a few stop sign also. So what's the precision? We have to send a letter or my complaint is not enough?
No, you're at the right place. We'll have our Public Works Director, Eric Morimoto, and our Police Chief take a look at your concerns. We do have an ordinance that prohibits parking overnight during the winter months, but they are
Yeah,
village
but during the
streets.
summer, those guys, they fix the car, they replace, they change the oil, there's a whole bunch of oil on the street, and who's gonna pay for the damage? Me and Mr. Erickson, because they're gonna raise the tax, right? They don't move the car, I don't even know if the strip was swept or not during the summer, you know? During the winter is fine. Nobody park because that's the rules. But can we ask for, just only for our subdivision, no parking during the night? Our board approved this.
Well, they don't have any jurisdiction on our roadways, on your.
I understand, that's why I'm here. I
Right.
represent.
Well, that's something that we could take a look at. We do have some areas that are a little bit more congested. We prohibit parking on certain sides of the streets. Maybe that's something that we could look at, but I don't think, to be honest, that we would be able to do a complete ban on a street completely. That's something that we've looked at other neighborhoods in the community, that we prohibited parking on east or west or north or south sides of streets.
Well, this is each unit owner have a 4 parking space for the car. I don't know if it's some limit, how many family could live in the units or something like this. This is by the village, some rules or something like this, because people, so the tenants or owner, they own like 7 vehicles. And they took, me and my wife, we have 2 cars.
I've written down all the issues and we'll review it from a staff level and then we'll report back to the village board related to this. So I appreciate you bringing this feedback to the village board this evening.
But this is my 5th complaint already. I have been 4 times upstairs, and this year. And the lady, she was very nice. She took my all information, address, phone number, and I don't hear any answer from you guys.
Well, we'll take it from here. Our staff will be in contact with you. We'll take a look at the area that you're concerned about. There's multiple jurisdictions in your community. You have your HOA that handles some of the
Yeah.
private property, and then there's
Yeah.
the village that handles some of the streets.
Yeah.
So we'll work with you, and we'll look
Yeah.
at what the jurisdiction says for parking within your complex, and what we can do for you from a village perspective.
Because the people, those guys sometimes, all Sunday, they replace some doors on a junk car or they change the oil on the street and or change the wheels or who knows, bumpers, whatever. You know, it's a danger for us, and for the kids also. Because a lot of kids just play in the parking and the street is so narrow, it's only one way. Because they park on one side and another side is no parking, it's fine. But we would like to, no parking on the both sides. Across from the park.
Okay, well, we could take a look at it.
Okay, did you want those? Okay. I'm marked down, where's the park? And that's OES. This is whole bunch from here to here, and from here to here. The people, the street is always blocked. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here who would like to address the village board? We'll go ahead and close open forum at 6:09. Moving on to my report, I have a proclamation, National Drunk and Drugged Driving Prevention Month, December 2019, whereas the December holiday season is traditionally one of the most deadly times of year for the impaired driving, and whereas for thousands of families across the state and the nation, holidays are a time to remember loved ones and lost ones. loved ones lost, and whereas the Village of Cary is proud to partner with this Department of Illinois, Department of Transportation, Division of Traffic Safety, and other traffic safety groups in the effort to make our roads and streets safer. Now therefore, I, Mark Kalnick, Mayor of the Village of Cary, do hereby proclaim December 2019 as National Drunk and Drug Driving Month in Cary, and do hereby call upon all residents, government agencies, business leaders, hospitals, and healthcare providers, schools, public and private institutions to promote awareness of impaired driving problems, to support programs and policies to reduce the incidence of impaired driving, and to promote safer and healthier behaviors regarding the use of alcohol and other drugs this holiday season throughout the year. Dated this 19th day of November 2019. Thank you. And then we have a graduation for our Citizens Police Academy. Josh, you helping me with this? Are you coming up? You want to be part of this? Sergeant Victor? I see Deputy named out back there. I don't know what he wants to do.
You're smart. You want to stay on the other side of the camera. I was just going to say a couple quick things about the Citizen Police Academy, and this was presented by a number of our personnel. It began September 18th and continued through November 13th. We had 17 participants, 14 of which are here tonight. They were, among other things that were discussed, they were presented information about the police department organization. They toured the McHenry County Jail. They saw the Southeast Emergency Communications Center. They heard about our mutual aid agreements and our participation in mutual aid groups such as NIPUS and ILEAS, and they were out at our very tall grass range participation. It was a little bit high in regards to the grass that was out there when we were doing it. Some of the department personnel that participated in this were Josh Victor, obviously he was the class facilitator, Deputy Chief Winkleman, Officer Jason Williamson, Deputy Chief Scott Nadenoff, Sergeant Jeff Witherow, Sergeant Greg Rutson, and Officers Tris Malone, Anthony Stanky. And then from outside of our agencies, we had Chief Brad Delatorre from the Cary Fire Protection District, members from CCOM, correction officers from the McHenry County Sheriff's Office, K-9 from the Woodstock Police Department, police officer from Crystal Lake, Salvador Alfano, and then the McHenry County State's Attorney's Office, State's Attorney came and did a presentation as well. So I'm certain that the participants learned a lot about the criminal justice system and the operations of the Cary Police Department.
Thank you. This is also a great opportunity for our residents to get a complete understanding of our whole community policing. There's so many times when we're asked, what exactly do your police officers do? Do they just sit on Route 14 and write tickets? Well, no, we don't. As the graduates will know, there is a lot more to our operation. And we are very proud of our department. We have really built quite a successful force under the leadership of Pat Finlan. It's been a pleasure to see the graduates come through here. This is the 7th time I'm doing this, to see the graduate class come through, and it's always enlightening to see the number of people that come through and have a completely different understanding of how we operate our police department. And we are looking at growing the alumni class, because it's important for people to have an understanding. This is a free class for you guys that we put together, so you have a complete understanding. And it's, the board has been very supportive of this, because it does take some of our resources to get these things done. We pull people off the streets. We have our sergeants that are salaried, and our deputies that take care of all these things, but it gives people a better understanding of how we operate the community. It's awesome that Patrick Maley was out here giving you an understanding of what the state's attorney does, because we work very good hand in hand with them. Regionally, we're very much in connection with all the other agencies, and it's important that we grow the community, that people have an understanding about policing, because unfortunately this day and age, there are some agencies out there that don't have a great reputation. And it's important that people, just regular, everyday residents in the village can have an understanding. So it's always great to have this here, and it's always great to be participating in the graduation. So enough of my talking, so we'll start the graduation. When I call your name, if you could just please come up, and we'll give you your certificate. David Faber. Did I butcher it? Saviar. I know, I'm like, I am totally gonna mess this up. See, look at this.
You can call me David.
David, thank you very much. There you go.
Thanks.
I think stick around, so we might get a class picture, you guys.
Oh,
Yeah, and we didn't mention that there's cake.
Oh, well, there's always gonna be cake. And I should mention before we go any further that we have Melissa Victor here, who is the president of the Citizens Police Academy alumni. So you'll get to know her really well. It's a great organization. You can really kind of get to know more of the community events that we do. We participate in our National Night Out. Some have participated in our Main Street Fest, in any ways that you can. So it's a good way to stay connected as a community. Joanne Callis. Hello. Congratulations.
Thanks for coming.
Sarah Gopke. Al Drews.
Thank you very much.
Russell Friend.
Thank you.
David Glover. Amanda Hernandez. Brian Lusak. Did you get that fight me back, guys?
No, I won't say which officer did this. Exactly. There'd be a report.
Yeah. Angela Maxwell. Congratulations. Stephen Norwood. Congratulations. I'm gonna flash this one up. Mark Notston.
No, Steve.
Close, no Steve.
No, Stein. No, Stein.
Stein. I should have just listened to the regular one. I apologize.
Thank you.
It's a hazard of the job. Michelle Pack. And Colleen Tobin. Courtney, where do you want them up here? Can I ask you guys to come back up here?
Tall people in back, short people in front.
I know the drill. Whoever wants to do the princess squat can go front, or whatever. It's all relative as to who's tall.
If only we could move this wall.
I know.
You guys need to get in closer.
Scooch in a little bit.
You don't need to be in it. Right. I can see she's too far over. Now we go.
All right, ready, one?
Windows down, get going.
Let them eat cake.
Yesterday, or this morning.
Exactly.
I woke up to WBBM. Just about they came up. It was on today.
Chief, these are the ones that were not here.
No, but all of a sudden it was just like, oh.
I can't keep track of all that stuff anymore. Like all of a sudden I'll have the TV on in the morning. I'll come on there with their analysis. Yeah, the roads are bad. I'm like, you've been sleeping all morning. You don't know what the roads are bad. It's like I called you. Because you're speaking like you're up north, like you've been out there.
I think I can make that happen. Just- But hold on one second, just come up and, come on up.
I live in Gary Woods like Stan. The other day, I got surprised when they delivered garbage cans. 2 days later, I got the letter from your office saying that we're going to deliver garbage cans. I think you got to get your stuff together, the mailings, for one. Number two, my question, because I keep seeing closed retail, what is the status of finding retailers in this town? The average household income is $106,000 as of the last time. That should be able to support more restaurants, less auto parts stores, and whatever else you can do to keep the tax dollars here versus going to Crystal Lake.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Trustee reports, I've been made aware of none, so I'm going to say that there's none. I will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items number 1 through 7 as shown on the village's website and is displayed on the video monitor during the village board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Betts,
Yes.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Collier,
Yes.
Weinhammer,
Yes.
Cavelli,
Yes.
Kraus,
Yes.
Thank you. And on to items for separate action. I will entertain a motion to approve an ordinance approving a text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance and Municipal Code related to cannabis business uses within the village of Cary.
So moved.
Second.
Brian, you going to hit this off?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, Village Board. The request before you this evening is a proposal for modifications to the Unified Development Ordinance for cannabis business uses. As the board will recall, we had a couple discussions a few months ago regarding the state act, which was passed, which allows for the recreational production and sale of cannabis within the state of Illinois. That act allows for local municipalities to adopt regulations should they wish to allow for the sale of or production of it within their communities, within their zoning regulations. After discussion was had back in September by the committee of the whole, there's direction provided to staff. Staff drafted regulations for allowing cannabis business uses within the village of Cary. Public hearing was scheduled before our zoning board back in October, which the recommendation is up for review for you this evening. I'll go a little bit of history again as far as the background of the act, what the act does regulate, and then in more detail into the proposed modifications to our Unified Development Ordinance. As the board's aware, and also for the public's knowledge, Illinois became the 11th state this year to approve the private use of of cannabis. The act, which was passed by the state, legally authorizes private use and possession for adults aged 21 and over. The act, as mentioned, provides the municipalities the ability of whether to allow sales or restrict sales within their individual boundaries. Currently, the state does authorize medical cannabis or medical use of cannabis within the state. Those regulations, when the act was passed, required that each municipality allow for medical dispensaries or cultivation centers within their zoning districts. This act is a little bit different, that it does allow us the ability to restrict those types of businesses. We're looking at from the the zoning authority that we would have within the village. Again, we can restrict it by zoning district, allows us to restrict by hours of operation. We can regulate proximity to specific types of uses, specifically schools, parks, or churches, et cetera, that may be sensitive to having individuals that are under the age of 21 that would be adjacent to this type of business. The Act does allow us to prohibit within residential districts. We can limit the total number of dispensaries that are allowed within the village. And then the Act does have requirements that if a dispensing organization were to locate within the village, it would restrict another dispensing organization from locating within 1,500 feet of that business. So those are requirements of the specific act passed by the state. The act also does allow, and it has since been amended to, the legislator amended, it still requires the governor to sign. It does allow for the creation of cafes and lounges where consumption of cannabis would be allowed. That is still at the discretion of the village whether we would allow those types of uses or not. And under the Amendment Act, there's additional identification as far as where those businesses can be. So tobacco shops, existing tobacco shops would be allowed to, that can have smoking in their premises under the Smoke-Free Act. They would also be allowed to have cannabis consumed in the premises if the communities were to allow that. As mentioned back in September was the last discussion that we had on the topic before the committee of the whole. That was when the board directed staff to draft the proposed regulations. Under the act, there are specific requirements on advertising that a business can have that is associated with cannabis uses, which are summarized in the slide. Essentially, it would restrict any advertisement from being located within 1,000 feet of a school, park type property. So if there is a billboard, for instance, that's next to an existing park, that would be a location that would be restricted from having advertisement on that billboard for this type of business. You cannot display cannabis in the advertisements, cannot show someone under 21 consuming the product, or make certain claims regarding the use of medical, of the specific product. So those would be restrictions that are above and beyond what our existing sign code would regulate, but that would, what the state act has additional provisions as far as how these businesses may operate and how they can advertise the products that they sell. Likewise, there are restrictions on the operation of the businesses that are above what may be in our code. Providing these for references so you can see that there are points that are beyond what staff recommended, that the state does have more strict requirements as far as how the businesses may operate. Specifically, no delivery services provided that they can't take the product and deliver it to somebody's home or another location. No drive-through facilities allowed. Need to have at least 2 employees working at any time in the establishment. Products need to be labeled and packaged in certain ways so that you know exactly the content of what the individual is purchasing should they go to the establishment, and that if the state's system for tracking purchases is down for whatever reason, the business cannot sell any products within that establishment. And then also they can only issue to individuals that with a state-issued government ID and have to scan that to verify somebody's age as well for the operation. Moving on to proposed regulations for the Village of Cary. This table is a snippet of our table of permitted uses within the Unified Development Ordinance. It specifies what uses are allowed or either permitted by right or conditionally within each zoning district. And specifically, this section of the table is for service-related uses within the community. Currently, medical cannabis dispensaries are allowed as conditional uses in our B1, B2, B3, and M districts. And then medical cannabis cultivation centers are allowed as conditional uses within our manufacturing district. Under the proposed changes that were discussed before the zoning board, the board and staff recommended to modify the table, as you can see in the slide, to remove the reference to medical. So any cannabis dispensary would be classified as the specific service use. but also be proposed to change from conditional uses to permitted uses within the B2, B3, and M districts for dispensaries, and then change, instead of this cannabis cultivation being allowed as conditional uses within manufacturing district, to also include the new uses that are identified in the act of craft growers and infusers. And then there are definitions that are also proposed within the ordinance that would speak towards those types of businesses and how they would operate. The reason for the change from conditional use to permitted use is also within the provisions that are proposed on the next slide. There are a number of requirements that were identified to require these businesses to comply with, so that they would need to meet those standards coming in to comply with the use. So those would typically be what we would require for a use if it were to be a conditional use. And the board, the ZPA level, also discussed if there were additional items that would need to be requested of a business to add those into those requirements. But overall, the board was in favor of allowing the uses by right. There was one board member that thought they should still be conditional uses, but couldn't come up with additional things that they would request of a business other than what was proposed within the ordinance. A few of the regulations that are proposed and within your packet and also in the ordinance, those provisions are identified, would be a change to Chapter 3 of the code. Similar to when the village went through our UDO process, we adopted regulations, as the board recalls, for solar panels. Previously, we had required those to be conditional uses and would go through the zoning process. Now, those uses are permitted by right as long as they comply with certain conditions. Although they're not comparing apples to apples from that perspective, this section would be similar as far as laying out what these types of businesses would need to adhere to in order to locate within certain zoning districts. Specifically, they would need to have a fixed location. Within a building, they could not be a mobile operation. Also, there's restrictions on their location in adjacency to other similar uses or sensitive uses as dispensaries, craft growers, or infusers. Staff was recommending, and the ZPA recommended, a separation of 500 feet from a property line of those sensitive uses. So schools, daycares, churches would be examples, and the image that you can see on the slide shows the current locations of those sensitive uses that would be within the village of Cary. Anything that is shaded in yellow would be an area that would be additionally restricted. And then the areas that are colored either pink, purple, or red would be a zoning district that would allow the use to go in. So areas that are zoned white would be, and this map are identified as white, would be restricted from allowing that use to go in. Other requirements mentioned with the state act does require separation of 1,500 feet from one dispensary to another dispensary. The proposed regulations would mirror that. Also, we're proposing a craft grower would not be located within 1,500 feet of a cultivation center, and then a cultivation center not be located within 2,500 feet of specific uses listed, and also residential properties. And that's consistent with the Medical Cannabis Act requirements currently for the separation for that type of use. Other proposed modifications would be a residential restriction so that a cannabis business use could not locate within a residential district, would provide adequate lighting for the business for both exterior and interior for both the safety of customers and employees of the establishment. Would require screening from adjacent residential uses, specifically if it's, the use is adjacent to a residential district, would require fencing and landscaping above what our code would require from a buffering standpoint. So if the use were to go into a district, there may be additional landscaping or a larger fence would be required to be installed to provide separation. If the use did not directly abut a property line, say it was in a shopping center, the ordinance provides discretion from the staff's perspective review to see if additional landscaping or fencing would be required to screen that use if there's any direct adjacency of the two uses. There would also be requirements for access and visibility from a public street, so the business would not be hidden from view from the public right-of-way. There are requirements for signage. Again, that would need to comply with our village code, but would also need to comply with the state code requirements for these types of businesses. Mirror the hours of operation were to limit sales from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., mirror the staffing requirements for 2 employees minimum, and sales would only be allowed within a closed building with no consumption allowed. As mentioned, the act does allow for the village to determine if we would allow consumption at either a dispensary or a cafe lounge. Staff and the ZPA have recommended that no consumption be allowed as part of these regulations. So the only place that a resident, if somebody were to purchase something, purchase a product at one of these establishments, would be in their home. It wouldn't be out in public or another business establishment within the community. And then production of products would only be allowed at craft growers, infusers, and or cultivation centers. Finally, the recommendations for definitions. These definitions mirror what's in the state act, or with slight verbiage changes to condense what the act references, but essentially a cannabis business would be any business that's involved in the sale or production or infusing of products. A dispensary would be a location that would sell the products. Craft grower is a business that would allow for the cultivation and packaging of cannabis products, and the fuser would be any facility that takes the product and converts it into another saleable product. Finally, a cultivation center is one that would cultivate, grow, and transport and perform activities related to the cannabis business use. Finally, there's just 2 definitions that are within our code now for medical cannabis uses, medical dispensary and medical cultivation centers. We're recommending to delete those definitions out of Chapter 11, as the new Section 3.11 here would cover those definitions as well for those types of businesses. As with any text amendments that are proposed, there are various standards that need to be met to modify our regulations, which are summarized on the slide. Generally, the proposed amendments cannot be detrimental to the orderly development of the village and need to promote the public interest and not solely the interest of an applicant. As the proposal here is directed from staff or proposed from staff and the ZPA, it's not in relation to a direct application from the village, so it's generally for regulations to regulate the land use should a business come to the village. If there's anything that a business wants to look in the community that does not comply with these regulations now, they still could request a text amendment in the future before the board for additional consideration. Just an example, if a business wanted to come in to allow consumption on the premises, they could petition the board to request an amendment in that regards. And it's up to the discretion of the board if they wanted to amend that, if everything was approved as is this evening. During a public hearing on October 24th, the ZPA did review the proposed changes, and after a lengthy discussion at that meeting, did propose approval of the text amendment, which is before you this evening, by a vote of 6 to 1. In addition to that text amendment, there is also a provision within the ordinance before you this evening to allow for amendment to Chapter 3 of the code to establish a 3% tax on the sale of any cannabis products within the village of Cary. So should a business located in here within the village, they would need to comply with that regulation as well. And that's the maximum that the Illinois Act allows for any municipality to tax those types of products. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the proposal.
Let's go. The board's had quite a few conversations regarding this. With the ordinance as it's written right now, does anybody have any concerns or any changes that they're requesting at this time? I know that had a couple of conversations with some people, so please bring them forward.
So just we discussed this already. I'll be voting no on this, but I would like us to consider upping the 500 feet to 1,000 feet of a school, church, or library. I feel like 500 feet is not a good distance to keep away from, school children and.
Anybody else have any?
Just the point I did change on the slide, you can see that's what 1,000 feet would equate to.
Can you go backwards and see the 500
Sure.
again, please?
That's
Better
500.
or worse? Yeah, I know.
Look at that, I know, yeah.
Just taking a point of reference.
And just from a comment as well, from a zoning perspective, if you do establish regulations that have a buffer requirement that would effectively eliminate areas to locate within the community, even though you're adopting regulations that may allow use to come in, if your buffer requirements effectively restrict it from going anywhere in the community, in effect, that can open us up from a legal standpoint to a challenge that our code does not allow that use going in. With looking at the 1,000-foot separation, there's still areas that would be open to it, but if you doubled it to 2,000 square feet, it would effectively eliminate other areas of the community, more areas of the community that would significantly restrict the number of properties that would be available.
And with, when you were mentioning about the craft growers and the cultivation center, did that mirror the medical marijuana distance?
No, so the cultivation center, the limitation is 2,500 feet, and that includes any residential properties as well. That's under the state act requirement for a cultivation center. For infusers and craft growers, it would just be a similar distance
Oh, the
here.
distance between one another, though, the 1,500 feet?
It's
you mentioned?
1,500 feet, correct.
Was that what it was for medical marijuana? I thought you made a statement about it mirrored the medical marijuana.
That would be for the cultivation, the 2,500 foot separation. I don't believe the only separation that there is within the new act is for the separation between one operator and a new one, which is that 1,500 feet.
And for the medical marijuana, it's 1,000 feet for schools and libraries, correct? So we're not, because originally when we had a discussion at committee of the whole, we had discussed that that's what it was for medical marijuana, it was 1,000 feet, correct?
For medical cannabis cultivation center, it's 2,500 feet.
Right, but what about just a dispensary, though?
There's not a separation for a dispensary that I'm aware of. We discussed 1,000 feet, but I don't believe there is a separation for medical cannabis.
Okay, I thought we just got, no? No? I want to remember that? Okay.
No.
In this ordinance too, I know that we've had a couple presentations from people with regards to security. Does this mirror, is there anywhere written in the state's ordinance or the state and statute that dictates the amount of security? Because they talked about how these dispensaries have a lot of security,
Yes.
cameras and that stuff. Okay.
Yes, and I believe the recent amendment does require that each business need to have, I don't want to count, officer or somebody on presence in the establishment as well that would monitor it. That's still going through for.
There's staffing requirements
Right.
that they have to meet for the state, so.
Yeah, they must contract with a private security contractor that is for the business and provide on-site security at all hours of the dispensary's operation.
I have a couple quick things. Cultivation center, this is just my own curiosity here. Do we garner is there any tax that comes to us from having a cultivation center? Seeing that they're just they're not selling it direct, so we're not, what's the benefit to us saying we want a cultivation center?
From the medical cannabis side, we have to allow the cultivation centers within the community. The restriction on their location, the separation includes a 2,500-foot requirement along any residential districts. With the layout of our community from that state requirement, there is actually no zoning property in the village of Cary that would allow that use under the restriction. So although the regulation does limit the ability to do it in town, it's not something that the village is adopting. It's mirroring what the state act actually would allow.
You know, and we did talk a lot about this, and it's I know that there's great points on both sides of it. You know, we want to bring it into our community, we not bring it into our community. We're seeing that a lot of our neighboring communities have approved this. You know, I believe Fox River Grove approved this, did they not?
Yes, Crystal
And
Lake.
Crystal Lake.
Lake
So
and
I'm just looking at our surrounding communities that it's going to impact us. And I think that we look at very tight budgetary restraints and having the ability for a potential additional 3% tax. Whether we agree or disagree, it's already passed. The time to discuss whether or not this is legal or not is gone. So it is legal, and I just think that we put a lot of thought. You guys have done a great job, I think, with listening to input from us, from the committee of the whole, and from different experts that came in and talked with us. And I think we've got a good policy set up here to start it off.
Any other comments? We have a request on the floor right now to increase from 500 to 1,000 feet. Is there anybody else that would agree to that?
Can you
Or
explain that again one
Yeah,
more
I
time,
wanna-
Ryan, about the 1,000 feet, but the state could say no to that, or they do say no to that?
So the act does not provide separation requirements as far as, with the Medical Cannabis Act, there are requirements or separation that you can have to sensitive uses. The Recreational Act, or the second act that was passed this year, does not have those requirements in there. So if the Village of Cary wanted to adopt regulations, those would be our own establishments as far as what the separation would be. So the 500-foot buffer is, it's just intended to provide separation from sensitive type land uses to these types of businesses. There is no requirement that it needs to be 250 feet, 500 feet, or 1,000 feet. It's up to the discretion of the village to determine what that limit would be. The medical cannabis had, for cultivation centers, has recommendations for that separation of the 2,500 feet. But on the state act, there is no requirements for these types of businesses, except for if one is to locate in the community, you can't have a second one next to it. It's got to be separated by 1,500 feet.
Can we talk a little bit about the properties that would be excluded at 1,000-foot buffer? Can we go back to that?
Sure.
So at the 1,000-foot buffer, it's
So the main changes going from 500 to 1,000 feet would be next to or adjacent to the St. Barnabas Church on Cary-Algonquin Road. There are a couple properties that are along Cary-Algonquin Road with 500 feet that potentially a dispensary would be able to locate within. If you were to increase to 1,000 feet, it would eliminate both of those properties. Also around the Goddard Daycare Building, this is with the 1,000-foot buffer. It would eliminate most of the commercial property in that area. If you were to go down to 500 feet, it would allow for more of the undeveloped area on the west side of the tracks to potentially be developed. Also, along Route 14, with the KinderCare daycare facility along 14, with the buffer yard increasing in that location, would eventually go to the intersection beyond Silver Lake Road and Route 14, and then to the north along, Silver Lake Road, where Aptar currently is located at, with the daycare or the preschool that's on the Park District property. If that were to expand, it would take up more of that zoning district, as would the buffer around the high school would come up to that point as well. There would still be locations along First Street on the east end of town and the center west portion of town that would allow for the use at 1,000 foot.
So there are some properties that would be impacted by this. Certainly the properties that are still available, we don't know if the property owners, if the management companies, if they would support this even. They could say no.
So I'm not hearing any changes to reduce it or to expand it from 500 to 1,000.
I'll go ahead and second it to 1,000.
1,000?
Yeah, I have no problem with the 1,000 either.
1,000.
It doesn't really eliminate much,
That's what I feel.
right?
1,000?
It does, I mean, for a decent area
Couple
by
places.
Goddard, which I'm fine with.
I can't imagine someone putting it there anyway, but yeah, I
Yeah,
don't see
okay.
that's And we've got plenty of good visibility.
There's enough visibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there any other changes or any other amendments anybody wants to make to this ordinance? So we have a motion on the, do I need to recall this with the, or can I just say it's amended now with the?
We have to vote on it.
And specify what the amendment is. yeah.
Okay. I have a first and a second. Do I need to do a roll call for the,
Yes,
okay.
it's an ordinance.
Yeah. Courtney, can I have a roll call to change the ordinance, to amend the ordinance?
But
Cavelli?
do you want him to verbally?
Do I want me
Right,
to verbally
so-
state it first?
Right, so the motion should be stated to approve do you have the wording of the motion in the
Yes.
staff report? Yeah.
I have it right here, but I'll just add as amended to change the
Right.
distance.
And then just
Yes,
refer
I'll
to
refer to this.
section
Okay.
in the ordinance is being changed from 500 feet
So you can flip to,
to 1,000 feet.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
That is
Got all that?
We're going to pause.
section,
Section 5,
That's why they
Section
pay me the
5.
big bucks, huh?
yeah, so it's section 5.
paragraph 2.
Paragraph 2B.
Throw 'em a curve.
Right.
To be or not to
Is
be.
being amended to change from
I like
500
1,000 just
feet in
That's-
the draft
on that
ordinance
side by Goddard for sure.
1,000.
And here.
Okay. So I can reread the motion then. Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve an ordinance approving a text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance and Municipal Code related to the cannabis business uses within the Village of Cary to amend Section
5
5
to
2B
B.
from 500 feet to 1,000.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Cavelli?
Okay, so I just want to be clear so am I voting on just the change and not voting on the ordinance itself?
Voting on the whole thing.
On the whole
The whole
thing.
thing?
With the
Okay.
change.
With the change.
Okay, well, thank you for your consideration to everyone, but no.
Okay.
Weinhammer?
Yes.
Kraus?
Yes.
Collier?
Yes.
Betts?
Yes.
McAlpine?
Yes.
Thank you. Administrators report. Jacob, do you have anything for us?
Just quickly related to the budget, we are starting, it's that time of the year, here to start the budget process. I emailed out a draft budget calendar with a few dates for budget meetings. If there are any challenges, I've heard from one trustee already, but please let me know if any of those dates do not work for you.
Thank you. Chief Finland has vanished.
You went to go get cake.
Okay, okay.
It's cake time.
I'd be up there in a minute.
Let him eat cake.
Director Morimoto?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple items for the board this evening. First, as a reminder to the residents, our overnight parking restrictions for winter operations that were alluded to earlier, they do take effect in December. Obviously, winter's kind of given us a sneak preview and hit us a bit early, but those officially do begin in December and go through March. And then we're going to have our analyst Courtney Sage give an update on the transition to the new refuse hauler, Flood Brothers.
So the final advance disposal pickup is Wednesday, November 27th. That day will begin to pick up their carts. So we're reminding residents to leave the carts out to be picked up. Flood Brothers will begin their collection the first week of December. And you're able to view the collection schedule map as well as more information about the program on Flood Brothers' site. But if there are any questions, you can also reach out to them by email or phone as well.
And they're going to be dropping off the new ones.
They are in the process of
Correct.
dropping off the
Yep.
new ones. About 50% of the carts have already been dropped off. So they're moving quickly. That's it.
Thank you. Director Simmons?
Just briefly want to give an update for the board. Grand opening will happen before our next village board meeting. But the Cary Senior Living project, they're wrapping up construction out there. Residents are beginning to move in. They will be hosting a grand opening ribbon ceremony on December 3rd, which is the date of our next village board committee of the whole meeting at 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. All the board members are welcome to attend if you are able to that day.
Thank you. Director DeSharm, anything right now? We're going to be picking your brain in a minute. Any future agenda items in discussion by the village board? Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are no nays. No opposed.